Okay, my name is Lia Martínez. I am from Sopris Instruments. I hope you can all hear me. It's a little bit difficult to figure out where to stand with these microphones. They have asked me to give this talk in English, but if you have questions in Spanish afterwards, I also speak Spanish, so please don't hesitate to come up and ask your questions. I am a geophysicist from Colorado. I work with Sopris Instruments. We're a manufacturing company based in Denver, but we sell borehole geophysical instrumentation all around the world. And I have been working with Sopris for over a decade now, so over 10 years. So this talk is just a kind of a general overall talk focusing on why we might need to gather this information. Oh, geez. Okay, don't touch them. Why we might need to gather this information from using borehole geophysics when you have all of this other information that you're collecting in mining applications. Well, well logging data has been collected in the oil and gas industry since 1928. So oil and gas uses this extensively. They would not dream about drilling any borehole and expending the amount of money it costs to drill without collecting this downhole geophysical information as well. So collecting both geology and geophysical information from these boreholes should really be considered and is required in the oil and gas industry, and I believe it should be done in the mining industry and every borehole as well. There's many different ways we can collect this subsurface information. We can use, obviously we already implement surface geophysics, outcrop data, borehole drilling, core data, and of course well logging. And when we talk about well logging, as it shows here in the picture, you can see that we are talking about a larger volume. So we're not just looking at the core data, which is a very small, thin diametered sample, usually about an inch and a half in diameter. We're talking about a much larger region. And by much larger, I generally mean on the scale of, I'll talk in feet here, on the scale of about 1 foot to 6 feet from the borehole itself, from the borehole axis. Okay, so different borehole solutions that, I don't know why this keeps advancing, but different borehole solutions that we can collect in geophysical information from the borehole include ore body delineation, lithology, bed boundaries, clay content, in-situ quantitative density, which can be very useful in coal and iron mining and other density important applications, borehole diameter, porosity, deviation or verticality of the borehole. We generally collect that information while drilling from gyroscopic information in any case, and fracture characterization and rock strength, which is probably the most widely applied use for this information in the first place. So I'm not sure if you can see this. I was hoping it would be more broadcast on this back screen here, but it's small. I can show you guys this. If anybody wants a copy of this presentation, please let me know. Oh, a little bit off the screen, but thank you for trying. So what you can see here is there's different applications for each of these things. If you're looking at ore body delineation in a borehole, you can apply different applications like resistivity, induced polarization, density, magnetic susceptibility. If you're looking at lithology, characterization and differences in rock type, then you can apply things such as gamma, natural gamma, spectral gamma. It's hard for me to read my own notes here. Dual induction, for example. There's different porosity applications, which are obviously more important if you're working in coal or lithium applications, but also in mine dewatering, porosity can be very important. And then we have applications in that area such as sonic, neutron, and borehole magnetic resonance. So overall, you can see here from this picture that what we're talking about is equipment that's fairly portable. This is actually from a mine site in Panama. You can see that the equipment comes in very, very small winches. They're tools that are very easy to transport and use in a small tripod. So we're not talking about really heavy-duty equipment here. It's very easy to use this type of stuff at a mine site. We're an optical televiewer. I'm sure many of you are familiar with. You've probably seen these data sets. Sorry, every time I click forward, it keeps advancing 2 slides forward, and then I have to go back 1. So I apologize for that. But So the optical televiewer you guys are probably most familiar with. It's really just a very high resolution 3D camera. And what makes it special is that you get that oriented information with it. So there's an orientation sensor, a 3-axis magnetometer and accelerometer inside the tool. And this comes from any manufacturer, right? We're just one of many. And so any manufacturer is going to make optical televiewers. You can get that 3D oriented digital core. So you get a digital core with this sensor. And that can be really important because you're able to collect some data in situ, collect that fracture orientation information in situ and avoiding oriented core that could be rubbleized in a box. So you may not have intact core to get that oriented fracture information from. So it can be used in very small diameters, used up to 8 meters per minute. In logging speed, that depends on the resolution that's decided in the field and the tool that's being used. Optical televiewers need to be used, obviously, because it's a camera, need to be used in dry or clear water. Acoustic televiewer, on the other hand, can be used in a mudded borehole or in dirty water. So this is fluid-filled boreholes, fluid-filled boreholes only. So you're looking at water-filled boreholes, could be clean, could be dirty water. You can use these in mud-filled boreholes, so you can see through that mud, but you don't get that true RGB, red, green, blue color pixels like you do with an optical televiewer. Similarly, very small diameters, 2 millimeter pixel resolution. It's the highest resolution you can go, 8 meters per minute logging speed. These are just things to keep in mind for those of you that are looking at doing these televiewer projects, right? When you're looking at budgeting and collecting this televiewer data, kind of keep these logging speeds in mind, keep these resolutions in mind, because you're the ones who are going to be making the decisions about what to determine for your project. So if this doesn't make a lot of sense, I just wanted to give kind of an overall view of televiewers, right? When we're talking about fracture orientation, we're looking at it in 2D. So we're looking at sinusoids, right? An unwrapped planar feature. If we unwrap a 3D planar feature, it looks like a sinusoid. Sorry, looks like the formatting for this slide didn't work out very well. But on the left, you can see that fracture density is very clearly apparent. Less fracture density on the left, more fracture density on the right. And really the considerations that should say ATV and OTV considerations, the considerations we're trying to keep in mind when we're looking at acoustic and optical televiewer surveys and seeing if that's right for you, because you may not want to do a televiewer survey, right? If you're working with highly fractured rock that doesn't allow you to keep an open borehole for more than 5 minutes. I mean, sometimes you drill and you pull those rods and it immediately collapses back in on itself. And what do you do there? The only way to do that, to collect televiewer data in a borehole that is that unstable, is to do it in lifts, right? To pull out a section of rod at a time, log that, 20, 30, 50 meters, and then pull out another section of rods and then do it again. So you may have to do it in different lifts. And when you do that, your drillers are on standby. That can take a lot of time and that can take a lot of money, obviously, if they're on standby. So that's a consideration that you need to keep in mind when looking at whether you're going to do a televiewer survey or not. But the information that you do get from televiewer surveys as far as orientation is much more accurate. And we can go into the math on that if anybody wants to go head-to-head with me. But we can go into the math and show you that the accuracy of your fracture information when it comes from in-situ measurements of a televiewer in the hole is going to be higher accuracy than you will get with oriented core. And that's just a fact. But like I said, you may want to do oriented core if you just can't keep your boreholes open. Okay? You got to look at whether you have fluid in the borehole, as I talked about before, and obviously your project budget, drilling depth, borehole diameter. These can all play into whether you want to collect televiewer data or not. If your lithology is highly magnetic, that will affect the deviation sensor within the tools themselves. In that case, you're going to need gyroscopic data from that hole in order to process really clean, accurate televiewer data, because you are able to use that gyroscopic deviational survey in the processing. So collecting data is one piece of the puzzle. As I'm sure many of you in this room know, the other half of that puzzle is processing it and making that data effective. We end up with too large of data sets, especially when we're working with, sorry, it just keeps going forward. Especially when we are working with service companies that might be selecting every little fracture that they see because they don't know what you at the mine site really need, right? They might not know what your goals are for that structure interpretation, so they're just picking everything. They're picking every single structure there, and then you get this data set that's too big, it's too much, and it's not what your goals are for the project, right? So you may want to bring that interpretation in-house, or you might just want to really know ahead of time what your goals for that Televiewer survey are. If you're going to be doing Televiewer surveys, be sure to communicate that to your team if they're doing the processing themselves, or communicate that to the service company that you're working with. Okay, let's see if it'll actually stay on this slide before and not go forward. Nope, it went forward. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to mention, I wanted to talk in addition to televiewers on a high level about some of the other measurements that can also be collected downhole. Televiewers are obviously the most common used in the mining industry right now, but you can collect a lot of this information, whether it be induced polarization, resistivity, radioactivity that comes from naturally occurring radioactivity around us, right? Potassium, uranium, thorium, these are very common things to measure in a borehole, and they obviously differ by rock type. So this just gives you a high-level look at how that radioactivity may change with rock type on the left here. And lower down, again, it's probably too small for you to see. You could see resistivity or conductivity and how that changes by lithology as well. So it's really common these days, especially in many copper mining applications or metals mining applications, to collect spectral gamma data with induced polarization and resistivity data. It can be used to correlate with and add depth resolution to your surface geophysical data. Many surface geophysical data sets only have, at best, meters wide resolution, whereas your downhole data will give you resolution down to the centimeter level. So that can really add that quantitative high resolution when you're looking at these data sets. Okay, let's see if it'll go forward now. Okay, handheld and laboratory data versus downhole. It's been very common in the industry to use laboratory data, handheld instrumentation to collect magnetic susceptibility data, to collect conductivity data. And when we use those handheld instruments on a piece of core, you're collecting it on a core sample that's really only an inch and a half in diameter. And so that leaves a lot of room for error. It's just not a very big sample. Whereas when you collect that data downhole in situ, again, you're surrounded by the rock itself. So you're collecting a much more accurate measurement, and you're also collecting it at a higher resolution. When you have geologists in a laboratory setting or in a core shack setting, and they've got a handheld magnetic susceptibility meter, they're generally collecting that data maybe every meter, maybe every half a meter. But each one of those samples takes about a full minute to collect, right? Each sample that they take. And then they note it down by hand. However, if you do that in a borehole, you're collecting that same information, like I said, higher accuracy and higher resolution. So collecting magnetic susceptibility data, density and neutron data, collecting all of this downhole can just bring that, again, that more accurate, more precise information to the downhole data information you have. Okay, I wanted to try and keep it within. So, oh, I'm sorry, it's going too fast. I don't know why it keeps going forward like that. So new developments. I wanted to take a little bit of time on this slide to talk about new developments. As you can see here on the left-hand side, we've got a picture. Again, it's a little blurry here, but you can see that this is borehole magnetic resonance data, otherwise known as BMR or NMR. You may have heard of BMR, borehole magnetic resonance. It's mostly applied in porosity and permeability applications currently. So this is probably one of the newer tools that's on the market. It is expensive. So that's one of the most difficult problems with some of the newer instrumentation that we're seeing on the market now applied in boreholes. A lot of this instrumentation is very expensive, right? And so when we're talking about price, that really depends on what you're looking for. So borehole magnetic resonance data collects quantitative porosity, and then you can process that information to get permeability information, useful in mine site dewatering, useful in lithium applications. It has been used to replace packer tests in many situations. So when you're looking at a very, very costly packer testing project, and it's very heavy, it's very time consuming, and the resolution might only be a meter to a couple of meters resolution when doing packer testing, borehole magnetic resonance might fit within that budget in that situation. Additional developments, we're looking at NGen would stand for neutron generator tools. So we have a number of different tools that are hitting the market and or are already existing on the market that are implementing neutron generators. So the primary use for a neutron generator tool would be collecting that porosity information, but without radioactive sources needing to be used, right? So radioactive sources, we want to avoid those really in all industries if we can. But if you need that density or you need that neutron information, neutron being porosity, if you need that information, then sometimes the only way to get at that information is to employ a radioactive source. But if a source is lost down the hole, that can mean big problems for a mine site. It can be very risky. So coming out with a neutron generator, that is something that will allow us to avoid that risk, right? It is something that can be turned off from the surface, uses deuterium reactions to be able to generate neutrons and get that porosity information. And then down here at the bottom, I kind of gave a list of some of the other tools that we're seeing more and more frequently on the market. Pulsed fast and thermal neutron activation, right? That sounds very scary. What does that mean? What that means is that in a lot of cases now, there are some manufacturers on the market that are making these tools. Currently, the ones that I'm aware of are in the $1 million price range, but it allows you to collect downhole grade information in situ in real time. So if you can collect downhole grade information, we're talking about iron, copper, etc., downhole in real time, maybe the $1 million is worth it, right? Obviously, that would be a slower moving tool. It still, in my opinion, needs to be moved along commercially a little bit more to bring it into the wider market, but there are mine sites currently using these tools nowadays. There's also a couple of companies in the market that make and offer services in downhole XRF, right? These tools are not commercially available for service companies to use. They're in-house tools that are used by the service companies that make them. But I just want you guys to be aware that downhole XRF does exist, and it's very applicable in certain situations on a case-by-case basis. You also have more advancement happening in downhole ground penetrating radar, GPR, and downhole seismic. There are companies here and maybe in the room right here, I was talking to them earlier, that make downhole seismic tools, okay? And then we've got expanded use of more surface to borehole geophysics, right? That relation between doing that surface geophysics and relating it to a tool downhole. So that, I'm gonna wrap up, and thank you for your time.